Good morning, beloved. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are happy to continue in the genealogy of Jesus as we talk about, well, the people that God chose to be His family. And you know what? They haven't all been winners. They've mostly been losers. Mostly been people that sometimes they do good, sometimes they do bad. Some of them just did bad. But there's a great comfort in this. God did not pick perfect people to be His family. And you know what? That's what He chose of His biological family. Guess what He chooses of His spiritual family? He still does not choose perfect people to be His family. He picks people who will listen to His Word, who will allow Him to transform our hearts and come to Him. Beloved, that is our charge. Not to be perfect and come to God, but to come to God and be made perfect. There's a story of a fellow by the name of Brad Lewis. He lived in Sydney. And he was playing with his boys, his young sons. He was playing with Nerf rifles. And you know what? One of the Nerf darts, it flew out of the window and over the balcony, and his 8-year-old son was chasing after it. And before he had the first capacity to understand the precarious situation he was in, his momentum was leading him to the railing and over it. Brad did not hesitate. Brad did not have time to even think. Brad acted. Mr. Lewis plunged himself over his balcony and clutched his son into his arms. He brought his child close to his heart, clutched him, clung him as close to his chest as possible, and curled up so that he would protect his son. And the consequence of instinctively putting his son's welfare above his own meant that Brad Lewis hit the concrete below head first. The consequence of putting his son before himself meant that he cracked open his skull. He bruised his brain, and he fractured his C6 vertebrae. And yet on the way to the hospital, he still wasn't thinking of himself. What words he was able to mutter in and out of consciousness was, "Is my son all right? And don't let my kids see me this way." And they took this man, this hero, to the hospital. And I am happy to report to you, after weeks of recovery, after a shaved head, after a brutal scar that goes all the way down to here, they were able to stitch him back together again, and the power of God restored him and healed him fully. And on the way to the hospital, because of his actions and his consequences, his son was treated for shock. And only for shock. Brad put his son first, and his son was not harmed. All of the pain and the suffering of his son's, and wasn't malicious, but his son's mistake, his son's actions were not paid for by his son. They were paid for by his Father who loves him. Because that's what fathers do. That's what our Father in heaven did for us, His children. That is not what King Ahaz did for his sons. Today is not a story of a man who did good. Today is not a story of a man, you know what, he was doing mostly good, but he made a mistake. Today's story is not a man who did bad, but in the end he turned good. Today's story about King Ahaz, found in 2 Kings 16, that's 2 Kings chapter 16, is a story of a man who made mistake after mistake after mistake. And this morning we will learn from his mistakes. Because God would rather us not learn them firsthand. He would rather us learn from someone who didn't learn from their own mistakes. This is not a happy story. 2 Kings chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. In the 17th year of King Pekah the son of Remaliah, and that's just who the king of Israel at the time, it's giving us a chronological reference because Kings, it tells us the story of the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. So it's telling us where we are. In the 17th year of Pekah the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. And if you've been following along in the sermon series on the genealogy of Jesus, this makes him the grandson of last week's story of King Uzziah. Verse 2, Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. And as we have said in this series, kings of Judah, it's hit or miss. Sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong. The kings of Israel were always wrong. So to follow in their ways is to do wrong. It says he even burned his son as an offering, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and made offerings on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Beloved, we're on the other side of a pandemic. We struggled through it. And we have loved ones who were infected, loved ones who perished as a result of COVID. COVID claimed the lives, it says that in the record books officially, 1,058,975 people are attributed to deaths either by COVID or COVID-related, which means if they died of something else while they had COVID, they're counted in that number. 1,058,975 deaths. And our nation changed its culture as a result of COVID in order to fight COVID. We changed our economy. We made sacrifices. We lost social connection. We stopped going places. We moved heaven and earth as best as we could to do everything that we could because 1,058,976 would have been one too many, and we wanted to stem the tide. We wanted to stop it. We wanted to fight it, and we wanted to overcome it. Well, every year in this country, 862,000 unborn die. 862,000 unborn babies die every single year in this country alone. That's what? 15 months of business as usual, and we changed our entire culture. We changed how we lived our lives. For 15 months of business as usual at Planned Parenthood, we changed our lives. Where is the life changing for the unborn? Where's the life-changing for the most vulnerable in our society? Our society claims that we are changing our culture to look after the minorities, about the least of these, against the marginalized in their culture. Where is the battle cry for the most vulnerable people in our country? For 1,058,975, we said no more. But 862,000 babies every year die because we don't say enough. We do not say enough. And you may be saying to yourself, whoa, Pastor, we're not talking about abortion here. We're talking about, this guy, he made his son pass through the fire. That was ritual sacrifice. That was child sacrifice. That's obviously evil. No one's advocating that. Are you sure? Because I'll tell you who's advocating that. In 2017, there was a peaceful protest, a pro-life protest in St. Paul, Minnesota. Where it was for pro-life, for people to gather together and to advocate for choosing life. And they were infiltrated and assaulted by a group of witches. Self-proclaimed witches who came dressed in outrageous garb, carrying vulgar signs, professing the most absolute obscenities. They started verbally and then physically assaulting the pro-life rally, and witches put them under attack. Do you know why? I'll tell you why. The same as it is today as it always has been. The same as it is today it always has been. Child sacrifice has ever been the economy of the dark spiritual forces. Did you know that one of the major contributors to Planned Parenthood are witches? But you know what? It's a peaceful religion, right? As they assault a rally. It's a peaceful religion, right? As they advocate for the death of children. It's a peaceful religion, right? Because all they want to do is kill your children and claim the credit for it for their dark forces that they worship. I am not messing around here today. All week long I have been struggling with this sermon, not to know where it was going because it was clear to me from minute one. Not for how to present it, because that was clear. I have been struggling with having the courage to face our culture and call evil, evil. And I am tired of it. I am tired, not of the evil in the midst, but of our cowardice to call it evil. Evil. It is evil. It is wrong. And it has no place in society. And if you want to see a more clear connection between child sacrifice and witchcraft, between abortion and what's going on, Deuteronomy 18:10 makes it clear-cut when God says that you will not engage in passing your sons through the fire to worship dark gods, nor will you seek mediums or diviners or those who practice witchcraft. It is clear-cut. Deuteronomy 18:10, if you want to write it down. The next time you go to a carnival and you see a palm reading. The next time you see a phone number for a psychic hotline. Remember the psychic hotline when they went bankrupt? How did they not see that one coming? The next time you want to waste your money and say it's no big deal or pull out a Ouija board, I want you to understand something serious. This is serious. We are not to play around with this. And we are to take the cost of it seriously because they narrowly claim credit for the lives of children to engage in their evil. And you may say to yourself, well, that's different. Clearly it's different. We're talking about children, right? We're not talking about the unborn, and those who advocate abortion will be very quick to tell you it doesn't count. They're not really human yet. They're just a mass of cells. They're not alive. Well, let's see what the God of heaven, the God of creation, the God of life says. He says in Psalm 106, verses 35 through 38, "But they mixed with the nations and learned to do as they did. They served their idols, which became a snare to them. They sacrificed their sons and daughters to demons. They poured out innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood." There are people out there that are saying we need to end the pollution. We need to do whatever we can to become more green. We got to stop pollution, but they are doing nothing to stop our land from being polluted by the blood of the innocent. They followed after everything that was going on around them and the dark cultures around them. They were influenced by them, and they did exactly what God told them not to do, and they fell right into the trap. But Pastor, no, that's child sacrifice. That's not abortion. They're not the same thing. They're completely different. And on a technicality, I will pin my hopes for eternity. On a technicality, I will say what I think is okay and get away with it. Well, you know what? Deuteronomy 12, verses 29 through 31. When God is giving before them the law of what to do. He says an interesting case. He gives an example of what to do if guys are fighting and they hit a pregnant woman by accident. They're not even trying to go after her. And if anything happens to the child, guess what? The crime that's supposed to lay upon that person who harmed that unborn child is supposed to be a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you harm a pregnant woman and her child dies, God calls that murder. And he says the consequence for that is the death penalty. So that technicality, but no, God, it's just a mass of cells. It's not real. It doesn't count. You prepared to stand before Jesus Christ on Judgment Day and tell him that? No. Look me in the eye and say with a straight face that Jesus is okay with it. Take me out of the equation. Take me entirely out of the equation because it's not about me. Look yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, Jesus is okay with this. Because when you go before him on Judgment Day, do you think you're going to be able to say, well, technically, that's not how I defined it, so I should be all right? Because you know how okay Jesus is with technicalities, right? That's why he got along so well with the Philistines, right? I'm sorry, the Pharisees, right? Because they were all about technicalities and the minutia and the jot and the tittle of the letters. And as long as we did the letter of the law, we were okay. So let's get off on a technicality and go before the King of Kings and say, I'm all right in my book. What's wrong with yours? God calls it murder. And he has a consequence for it, the same as murder. In Jeremiah 19, verses 4 through 7, we see the prophet Jeremiah, this is on the cusp of going into the exile. Tephoth was this land where all that child sacrifice was taking place. Oddly enough, it was known as the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom. And as a consequence of that, that's where everyone would go to. But Jeremiah warned them going to the exile that they didn't believe was going to happen. The exile that was going because they were doing the wrong things and following the wrong people. The exile that happened for a plethora of reasons, because they didn't free their slaves, because they didn't look to the widows and the orphans in their culture, because they worship other idols, but also explicitly because they had defiled the land and polluted with the blood of the innocent. They were going to be kicked out into an exile, and coming back from the exile, Jeremiah says, this land will no longer be known as Tephoth. This land will no longer be known as the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom. It will be known as the Valley of Slaughter. And when you get to the Gospels, guess what? You don't see any mention of Tephoth, the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom. You know what you do see a reference to? You see that land was so polluted and defiled they could do nothing with it. Absolutely nothing with it. So all they did was fill it with their rubbish. And they filled it with their rubbish and they burned it away. All their filth and their rubbish, because that land was already defiled and it was no good for anything else. So it was this constant, smoldering, blazing patch of land. And you know what it was called? It was called Gehenna. And if that word tickles your ear and you're not sure where I know it's from, it's because Jesus Christ used that plot of land right there as the visible warning of the word that we translate Gehenna into in English is hell.
That's right.
That is a place where rubbish is burned constantly, where trash goes to be destroyed by the fire. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good, because I'm not comfortable with it. That's not a place that I want to be.
No.
If you came in here to hear about lovey-dovey Jesus and everything's going to be all right, then you came to the wrong place, because I'm going to tell you the truth.
Amen.
If you said, well, I didn't come for a fire and brimstone, well, too bad. I'm going to tell you fire and brimstone you need to hear to change our hearts, to change our lives, because I would rather you be uncomfortable today than uncomfortable for eternity. Because, beloved, if you are offended right now, good. Because if you are not offended, you are not challenged. If you are not challenged, you are not learning. If you're not learning, you're not growing. If you're not growing, why are you here? You need to be changed to be more like Jesus Christ. We have been too much like the world. And I'm not talking about them that are doing it. I'm talking about us who have tolerated it. We have been too much like the world, and we need to change to be more like Jesus.
Amen.
Beloved, I'm making enemies today. I hope you're courageous enough to do it too. Because we need to stand on righteousness and stop tolerating evil in the language we use. It is wrong, and there is no place for it in the kingdom of God. He's the God of life. Job 3:16, very casually, it's not even about this. Job just mentioned that a stillborn child, he refers to it as an infant that has never seen the light. An infant. But no, those 9 months matter, right? The technicality of 9 months, it's a massive cells, it's an inhuman thing here that I can do whatever I want to it here, but on the other side, then it's a child. Well, God doesn't make that distinction. Scripture says an infant here, so it's an infant here. It's a child. When we get to Psalm 139, verses 15 and 16. Psalm 139, verses 15 and 16. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. You saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. We want to conveniently say life starts at birth. God says your life started before that. Amen. Even before you were conceived, God had already conceived of every single one of your days. Even before your father's father's father was conceived, Jesus Christ already died for the sins you had not yet committed. And even before he died on the cross millennia ago, he was already chosen before the foundations of the earth to be the solution for a problem that hadn't even existed yet because creation wasn't yet. And we want to quibble over a handful of months, 36 weeks. And look God in the eye and say, that doesn't count. Our story doesn't begin when we first draw breath. Our story has already begun when we are being fed by our mother's body. Beloved, Paul says in Galatians 1:15 that his story didn't begin on the road to Damascus. And his story doesn't even begin when we're first introduced to him, when he's standing beside approving of Stephen being martyred. Galatians 1:15 says that his story began in his mother's womb when God set him apart to be who he was, as pillar and example of what God can do with sinners and transform them into new life. It is not too late. God has a plan for you. It is not too late to change your mind, to change your side, to stop worshiping demons and idols and come to the Lord life. The Lord who has called you. The Lord who has formed you for something better than this. In Luke 1:41, we are introduced to John the Baptist. The first thing that he does ever when he's a 6-month-old child still in his mother's womb is to worship Jesus Christ. He consciously recognizes his Creator and worships Him with all of his heart as he leaps in his mother's womb before he ever draws breath. That's what a lump of cells can do. Recognize his Creator far better than we can. When we get to Isaiah 49:1, the prophet Isaiah says that he was named his name in his mother's womb. He was given his personhood. He was given his identity by God before he ever drew breath. He is not a lump of cells. He was always Isaiah. Always. When you're trying to figure out the name of your child, who they're going to be and what they are, you come across everything. And when you're trying to figure out what you're going to name your child, that's when you discover how many people you don't actually like in your life. Because you're like, I can't use that name. But when our first child was born, and we named her Kayla, we were thought of all sorts of different names which we should do, and we discovered very quickly she was always